I watched my ex-husband smile across the courtroom, certain he'd stolen everything I had, but he didn't know I was holding a dead man's secret, hidden in the very walls of our restaurant. The air in the courtroom was stale, smelling of old paper, cheap floor polish, and desperation. My desperation mostly. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white mountains on a pale, trembling landscape. Across the aisle, my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, I prayed Mark, sat with the relaxed confidence of a king on his throne. His expensive charcoal gray suit, the one I'd bought him for his 40th birthday, was perfectly tailored. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed. He leaned over to his lawyer, a man with a smile as slick and artificial as a used car salesman's, and whispered something. They both chuckled. The sound was like glass grinding in my ears. My own lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed public defender named Mr. Davies, gave my arm a reassuring pat. It didn't help. Every part of me felt like a frayed nerve. For 12 years, I had been Mark's wife, his partner, his biggest cheerleader. We had built a life, a home, and a business from the ground up. Or rather, I had. I'd poured my inheritance, every last cent my parents had left me, into our dream, a beautiful little bistro called the Gilded Spoon. I'd worked 16-hour days, covered in flour and grease, while Mark, with his natural charm and business degree, handled the front of house and the finances. He was the face, I was the engine, and I was happy with that. I thought we were a team. Then, about 2 years ago, the engine started getting phased out. "You look tired, honey," he'd say. "Why don't you take a step back? Let me hire a head chef so you can rest." I was tired, so I agreed. Then it was, "The books are getting so complicated, Sarah. I've got a professional accountant now. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it." Slowly, methodically, he had unwoven me from the very fabric of the business I had created. He'd had me sign papers I didn't understand, assuring me they were just tax formalities or LLC restructuring. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, the man who'd sworn to love and protect me. The protection ended the day I found the credit card statements for a secret apartment downtown and a string of jewelry purchases I had never seen. When I confronted him, the charming facade crumbled. The man I loved vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stranger. He told me he wanted a divorce. He told me the bistro was legally entirely in his name. The restructuring I'd signed off on? I'd signed away my ownership, my inheritance, my sweat, my passion. It was all his. He offered me a one-time payment of $5,000 to get back on my feet. $5,000 for a business that was now worth well over $2 million. So here we were. His lawyer had just spent 20 minutes painting me as an incompetent, disgruntled freeloader. He claimed I had been a hobbyist in the kitchen and that Mark's business acumen alone had made the Gilded Spoon a success. He argued that since I had no legal stake in the company and had been unemployed for 2 years, I was entitled to nothing. No alimony, no assets, nothing. My world was shrinking down to the 4 walls of this courtroom. I could feel the judge's gaze on me, professional and unreadable. I felt small, foolish, and utterly broken. Mark caught my eye across the aisle. He leaned forward slightly, just enough so I could read his lips. He mouthed the words, "It's over." Then, as his lawyer sat down, Mark leaned past him and hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that carried in the quiet room. "Not a penny for you, you hear me? You'll get not a single penny. You'll be lucky if you're not homeless." A cold dread washed over me, so intense I felt dizzy. He was going to win. This smug, cheating liar was going to take everything from me and leave me with nothing but the clothes on my back. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and shameful. I looked down at my lap, at the plain manila envelope I had been clutching like a rosary. My hands were shaking so hard the paper crackled. This was it, my last desperate 1 in a million shot. Mr. Davies stood up. His voice was steady, a stark contrast to the chaos inside me. "Your Honor," he said, clearing his throat, "my client has no desire to contest Mr. Turner's narrative of the business's success." Mark's lawyer smirked. Mark himself sat back, crossing his arms in victory. They thought we were surrendering. "However," Mr. Davies continued, his voice gaining strength, "we would like to present one final piece of evidence for the court's consideration regarding the initial funding and establishment of the Gilded Spoon." He walked over to me, and I placed the envelope into his outstretched hand. It felt impossibly heavy, like it contained the entire weight of my future. Mark's confident expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He watched, his brow furrowed, as Mr. Davies approached the bench. "What is this, counsel?" the judge asked, his tone laced with impatience. "It's a sworn affidavit, Your Honor," Mr. Davies said, placing the envelope before the judge, along with a certified copy of a bank statement. Mark's face went from confused to annoyed. "Objection! Ambush tactics! We haven't had time to review this," his lawyer snapped, jumping to his feet. "I'll be the judge of that," the judge said curtly, silencing him with a wave of his hand. He picked up a letter opener and slit the envelope with a sharp, decisive flick of his wrist. He pulled out a few stapled pages and began to read. The room was silent except for the rustle of the paper. Mark was starting to look uneasy. He kept shifting in his seat, his eyes darting from the judge to me. He had no idea what could possibly be in there. He thought he had erased every trace of me. He thought he had covered all his tracks. The judge's expression remained neutral for the first page. Then, as he turned to the second, his eyebrows shot up. He read a little further, then stopped. He looked up, not at the lawyers, but directly at Mark. His gaze was sharp, piercing. He then looked down at the document again, his lips tightening into a thin, hard line. Finally, he looked over at me, and for the first time I saw not pity or impatience, but a flicker of something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the tense silence. "Mr. Turner," the judge said, his voice dangerously low, "before we proceed, perhaps you could explain to the court the nature of your relationship with your late business partner, Mr. Alistair Croft?" Mark's face went completely white. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Every ounce of his smug confidence evaporated, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. He stared at the envelope on the judge's desk as if it were a venomous snake, poised to strike. Alistair Croft. The name hung in the air like a death sentence. Mark's jaw worked silently, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. It was as if I'd summoned a ghost right there in the courtroom. His lawyer, the slick Mr. Peterson, shot to his feet, sputtering, "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. Mr. Croft was a family friend who passed away years ago. This has no bearing on the division of marital assets." The judge fixed him with a stare so cold it could have frozen lava. "Sit down, Mr. Peterson," he commanded, his voice quiet but absolute. "I believe this has every bearing on this case. In fact, it may be the only thing that has any bearing on this case." He looked back at a trembling Mark. "I will ask you again, Mr. Turner. Who was Alistair Croft?" Mark swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He was Sarah's godfather," he stammered, his voice hoarse. "A family friend. He gave her a gift, the money to start the restaurant." "A gift?" the judge repeated, raising a skeptical eyebrow. He lifted the paper he was holding. "That's not what his sister, Eleanor Croft, the executor of his estate, claims in this sworn affidavit. She seems to be under a very different impression." My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought of dear Alistair, my godfather, a man who had been more of a father to me than my own. He was a retired venture capitalist, sharp as a tack even in his late 70s, with a booming laugh and eyes that twinkled with mischief. When my parents died, he'd managed my inheritance, growing it carefully. When I told him about my dream of opening a bistro, he was my biggest supporter. He saw the fire in my eyes, but he also saw Mark's smooth-talking ambition. Alistair was no fool. He didn't give me the money, I said, my voice finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. All eyes turned to me. It wasn't a gift. It was an investment. Mark shot me a look of pure hatred. She's lying. She's making this up because she's desperate. He snarled, his composure completely gone. Am I countered, looking directly at him. Or did you just assume that because Alistair died and his sister was grieving, that no one would ever look at the original paperwork? Did you think I was too stupid or too trusting to ever question you? The judge held up a hand for silence. He turned his attention back to the documents. According to this affidavit and the certified bank statement from the inception of the Gilded Spoon LLC, Mr. Alistair Croft transferred $250,000 into the initial business account. The memo line on the transfer reads, and I quote, "Initial capital investment, Croft-Turner Partnership." The affidavit from Ms. Croft states that her brother entered into a silent partnership agreement with you, Mr. Turner, and my client, Mrs. Turner, an agreement that stipulated a 50% ownership stake for him in the business in perpetuity. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Mark's slick lawyer looked like he'd been slapped. He was rifling through his own papers, searching for a document that he now knew didn't exist, or worse, had been fraudulently created. That partnership was dissolved, Mark insisted, his voice rising in panic. Alistair agreed to a buyout before he passed. I have the paperwork. Do you? The judge asked calmly, because Miss Croft has also provided a copy of her brother's personal journal from that time. In it, he seems quite excited about the restaurant's first-year profits and makes extensive notes about plans for expansion. It doesn't read like the journal of a man who just sold his stake in a burgeoning business. It reads like the journal of a man who believed he was a 50% owner. I remembered those days. Alistair would visit the restaurant sitting quietly in a corner booth, beaming with pride as he watched the bustling dining room. He'd never interfere, but he'd offer quiet advice. "Keep an eye on the food costs, Sarah Bell," he'd whisper, "and keep an even closer eye on the books." I had dismissed it as him just being his usual cautious self. I never imagined it was a warning. After he died suddenly from a heart attack 3 years ago, Mark had handled everything with Alistair's estate. He came to me with a folder full of complex documents. "It's a nightmare, honey," he'd sighed, looking exhausted and noble. Alistair's investment had all sorts of tax liabilities. The best way to protect our assets is to restructure. Dissolve the old company. Form a new one in my name. It's just a formality to clean things up. He'd said Alistair's sister Eleanor was a sweet but clueless woman who just wanted everything settled quickly. He made it sound like he was protecting me. Protecting us. In reality, he was meticulously cutting me and Alistair's ghost out of everything. He was stealing our dream. "This is a fabrication," Mark's lawyer finally found his voice, though it was shaky. "These documents are questionable at best." The judge simply ignored him. He continued to read from the papers in his hand, his expression growing more and more grim. Mark's face was ashen. He was starting to realize that the perfect crime he thought he'd committed was unraveling thread by thread. He hadn't just lied to me. He'd committed fraud against a dead man's estate. The judge looked up from the page, his eyes locking onto Mark with an unnerving intensity. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 20 degrees. "Mr. Turner," he said, his voice slow and deliberate, "this affidavit from Ms. Croft makes a number of serious allegations, not just about financial impropriety, but about the circumstances surrounding her brother's death." Mark froze, his panicked denials dying in his throat. The judge continued, reading directly from the document. "My brother, Alistair, telephoned me on the evening of March 12th, 2 days before he died. He sounded deeply distressed. He told me he believed he had made a terrible mistake with Mark Turner and that he suspected significant funds were being embezzled from the restaurant. He had scheduled an emergency meeting for the 15th with his forensic accountant to conduct a full audit of the Gilded Spoon's books. The judge paused, letting the words sink in, before delivering the final devastating blow. A meeting, he said, he feared he would not live to see. The silence that followed the judge's words was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on all of us. The implication was monstrous, a beast unleashed in the sterile environment of the courtroom. Embezzlement was one thing, but this was something else entirely. Mark looked as if the floor had dropped out from under him. The color had drained not just from his face, but from his entire being. He seemed to shrink in his expensive suit, his confident posture crumbling into a frightened slump. "This is insane! It's slander!" Mr. Peterson, his lawyer, was on his feet again, his voice shrill with panic. He was no longer a slick professional. He was a man on a sinking ship, desperately bailing water with a thimble. Alistair Croft died of a massive coronary event. It's in the death certificate. He was an elderly man with a known heart condition. This is a disgusting, opportunistic fantasy cooked up by a bitter ex-wife and a grieving sister. The judge didn't even flinch. He simply set the affidavit down on his desk and folded his hands. "Calm yourself, counsel. No one is accusing your client of murder, yet." The last word hung in the air, sharp and deadly as a shard of ice. He turned his gaze back to Mark, who was now visibly sweating. However, the timing of Mr. Croft's death, coupled with his stated intentions to launch a forensic audit, is convenient. Extremely convenient for the man who, within weeks of his partner's funeral, restructured the company to assume sole ownership and cut out his wife, the deceased's goddaughter. Every word was a nail in Mark's coffin. I felt a strange, detached calm settle over me. The storm that had been raging inside me for months had finally broken, and now, in the eye of it, there was only clarity. I remembered that phone call from Alistair. I had been at the restaurant, elbow deep in dough for the next day's bread. He had called my cell, his voice tight with an anxiety I'd never heard from him before. "Sarah Bell," he'd said, "we need to talk. About Mark. About the money. Don't say anything to him yet. Just be careful." I'd been confused, slightly annoyed. Mark and I had had a small argument that morning, and I assumed Alistair had somehow heard about it. "It's fine, Uncle Al," I'd said dismissively. "We're just stressed." I told him I'd call him back. I never did. 2 days later, he was gone. The guilt of that last conversation had haunted me for years. Now it was transmuting into a cold, hard fury. "My client has every right to restructure his own business," Mr. Peterson blustered, trying to regain control. "And my client's wife voluntarily signed the documents." "Under false pretenses, it would seem," the judge retorted smoothly. "Mrs. Turner, did your husband explain to you that by signing those papers, you were relinquishing your claim not only to the marital business, but also to the 50% stake in that business that was, by rights, part of your godfather's legacy to you?" "No, Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady. "He told me he was protecting our assets from tax liabilities related to Alistair's estate. He told me it was just a formality." The judge nodded slowly. "I see." He shuffled the papers from the envelope, pulling out another document. "And I suppose this was also a formality?" He held it up. "This appears to be a life insurance policy taken out by the Gilded Spoon LLC on Mr. Alistair Croft, naming the company as the sole beneficiary. A policy for $1 million signed into effect 6 months before his death. The signature authorizing the policy is that of the company's CFO, Mr. Mark Turner." Mark made a choking sound. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading terror. It was a look I'd never seen on his face before. It was the look of a trapped animal. The mask was gone. The charm, the confidence, the arrogance, all of it had been stripped away, leaving only the raw, ugly truth of the man I had married. A thief, a fraud, and maybe something much worse. The courtroom buzzed with whispered speculation. The court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard, capturing every damning detail. Mr. Davies, my lawyer, just stood there, looking as stunned as everyone else. I had only told him the basics, that I had proof Alistair was a partner. I hadn't shared the contents of Alistair's journal or the details of his sister's suspicions. I had kept that close to my chest, a final hidden blade. "Your Honor, this is still circumstantial," Peterson argued, though his voice lacked any real conviction. "There is no proof of any wrongdoing." "Perhaps," the judge conceded, his voice dangerously soft, "but there is now more than enough evidence of financial malfeasance and potential fraud to warrant a full investigation. I am placing a temporary injunction on all assets of the Gilded Spoon, LLC, and of Mr. Turner, personally, pending a complete forensic audit." He slammed his gavel down, the sound cracking like a gunshot in the stunned silence. "Furthermore, given the new and disturbing information presented today, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal review." Mark slumped in his chair as if his strings had been cut. His lawyer just stood there, mouth agape. The king had been dethroned. The walls of his castle were tumbling down around him. He had hissed that I would get not a penny, and now he stood to lose everything, including his freedom. I felt a surge of validation, of grim, hard-won victory. But it was short-lived. As the bailiffs moved to stand behind Mark's chair, the judge looked at me, his expression softening for the first time. "Mrs. Turner," he said, his voice gentle, "I am truly sorry for what you have endured. This has been a difficult day, but there is one more thing in this envelope that I believe you should see." He slid one final document out from the others. It wasn't a legal paper or a bank statement. It was a single sheet of personal stationery, folded in 3. "It seems your godfather had one last formality of his own." He passed the paper to the court clerk, who walked it over to me. My hands trembled as I took it. The handwriting was Alistair's familiar, elegant script. It wasn't an affidavit or a legal notice. It was a letter, addressed to me. I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the first few lines, and my breath caught in my chest. The blood drained from my face, and the fleeting sense of victory was replaced by a wave of ice-cold shock. The letter began, "My dearest Sarah Bell, if you are reading this, it means I have failed to protect you from Mark, and my worst fears have come true. But I have not left you defenseless. There is one secret about the restaurant that no one knows, not even Mark. The secret is not in the books, it's in the walls." In the walls. The words seemed to lift off the page and float in the air around me, cryptic and heavy with meaning. My mind raced, trying to grasp what Alistair could have meant. The walls of the Gilded Spoon? I could picture them perfectly. The exposed brick I had painstakingly restored myself, the warm, butter-yellow plaster, the dark wood paneling in the small bar area. What secret could a wall possibly hold? The judge adjourned the proceedings, and the courtroom erupted into a flurry of controlled chaos. Mark, looking like a ghost, was escorted by his lawyer into a side room. Reporters were already murmuring into their phones, sensing a far bigger story than a simple divorce. Mr. Davies guided me out into the hallway, his hand on my elbow. "Sarah, are you all right? What was in that letter?" he asked, his face a mixture of concern and professional curiosity. I just shook my head, clutching the letter to my chest. I need to go to the restaurant," I stammered. The words felt like they were someone else's. An injunction had been placed on the assets, but the building itself was just a physical space. I needed to see it. I needed to understand Alistair's final message. The drive to the Gilded Spoon was a blur. The city seemed distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. All I could think about were those walls. When I arrived, the lunch service was in full swing, an absurd pocket of normalcy in the middle of my imploding world. The staff, people I had hired and trained, looked at me with a mixture of pity and confusion. They had all heard by now that Mark and I were splitting up, and he had undoubtedly painted a picture of me as unstable and grasping. I ignored their stares and walked straight through the dining room, my heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the hardwood floors. I went to the office, the small, cramped room that had once been my sanctuary and had then become Mark's domain. It felt alien now, scrubbed clean of my presence. The familiar scent of old books and cinnamon was gone, replaced by the sterile smell of Mark's expensive cologne. I locked the door and pulled out Alistair's letter again, my hands steadier now. My dearest Sarah Bell, if you are reading this, it means I have failed to protect you from Mark, and my worst fears have come true. But I have not left you defenseless. There is one secret about the restaurant that no one knows, not even Mark. The secret is not in the books, it's in the walls. Remember when we did the renovation? You were so obsessed with that old brick wall in the main dining room, the one with the funny little recessed niche where the old dumbwaiter used to be. You wanted to make it a feature, put a vase there. I told you it was better to seal it up, that it would look cleaner. You were so disappointed, but you trusted my judgment. I remembered. Of course I remembered. It had been one of our few disagreements during the build-out. It was a beautiful little archway about 2 feet high and a foot deep, set into the original 1920s brickwork. Alistair had been adamant that we plaster over it. He'd hired a specific mason, an old friend of his, to do the work himself. At the time, I thought he was just being a fussy old perfectionist. The letter continued. That old mason, Pat, did more than just plaster over that niche. He built a hidden safe into the wall for me. One so seamless you could never find it unless you knew exactly where to look. Mark was so busy charming the suppliers and designing the menus, he never paid any attention to the dusty construction work. He has no idea it exists. Inside that safe, Sarah, is my real insurance policy. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. A hidden safe. All this time, it had been right there, in plain sight, but completely concealed. The original partnership agreement is in there, the one Mark told you we dissolved. It's the signed, notarized original, making you a 50% owner as my sole heir. But that's not all. For the last 6 months of my life, I was documenting everything. Every suspicious transfer Mark made, every time he moved money into accounts I didn't recognize. I made copies of his secret ledgers, the ones he kept on a password-protected drive. I have printouts, flash drives, everything. The full and complete proof of his embezzlement. He was bleeding the business dry from the very beginning, Sarah, building his own little nest egg while he let you work yourself to the bone. The combination to the safe is your mother's birthday, 8/15/56. Tears streamed down my face, blurring the precious words. Tears of grief for my godfather's lost life, tears of rage at Mark's bottomless betrayal, and tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude for Alistair's foresight. He had seen the snake in our garden long before I had, and he had prepared for the day its poison would be revealed. I stood up, my body trembling with a new, fierce energy. I walked out of the office and into the dining room. The lunch crowd was thinning. A few couples lingered over coffee. I walked to the far wall, the beautiful expanse of weathered brick that was the heart of the room. I ran my hand over the plaster, feeling for any imperfection, any seam. There was nothing. It was flawless. Pat the Mason had been a true artist. I looked at the spot where I knew the niche had been, about 4 feet up from the floor. How did it open? There was no dial, no handle. It had to be pressure sensitive. I thought about the combination. 08/15/56. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my shaking hands. I looked around. No one was paying me any attention. I pressed my palm flat against the wall and pushed on the spot where the top left of the niche would have been. A faint click. My heart leaped. I pushed the bottom right. Another click. I went through the sequence, pressing the wall in the pattern of the numbers, 081556. After the last push, there was a low, grinding sound like stone on stone. A perfect rectangle of plaster, about the size of a shoebox, receded an inch into the wall. I hooked my fingernails into the seam and pulled. A heavy little door swung open on a silent hinge, revealing a dark metal box set deep within the brick. The safe. My hands were clumsy as I reached inside. My fingers brushed against a thick stack of papers, a slim leather-bound journal, and several small plastic USB sticks. I pulled out the top document. It was the original LLC partnership agreement, bearing my signature, Mark's, and Alistair's bold, confident scrawl, all notarized with a date from 12 years ago. It was the smoking gun. It was everything. I felt a dizzying sense of triumph. I had him. Mark was finished, not just in divorce court, but in a criminal court too. This was irrefutable proof. I gathered the rest of the contents, my hands full of the truth Alistair had so carefully preserved for me. As I pulled out the last item, a thick manila folder tucked at the very back, another, smaller envelope slipped out from within it and fluttered to the floor. It was different from the others. It was sealed with wax, stamped with Alistair's personal signet ring, the one he always wore, and written across the front in his unmistakable script were two chilling words that made my blood run cold. For the police. For the police. The words seemed to burn on the paper, a final somber instruction from beyond the grave. My triumph curdled into a cold, heavy dread. This wasn't just about money anymore. Alistair, the careful, calculating investor, had separated this envelope from the financial documents. This was something else. This was the ace he had never wanted to play. My hands shook as I stood there in the middle of the dining room, holding a dead man's last testament. The weight of it was immense. I tucked the financial documents into my oversized purse and carefully placed the sealed envelope on top. I closed the safe, the plaster door clicking back into place with a sound of finality, once again becoming an anonymous part of the wall. No one had seen a thing. I walked out of the Gilded Spoon, my restaurant, without a backward glance, the staff's curious stares bouncing off a newfound shield of purpose. I didn't go home. I didn't call my lawyer. I drove straight to the Central Police Precinct, the sealed envelope a hot brand on my passenger seat. I walked into the station, the familiar smell of antiseptic and bureaucracy filling my senses, and asked to speak with a detective from the Economic Crimes Unit. An hour later, I was sitting in a small, windowless interview room with a detective named Harding. He was a man in his 50s with tired eyes that had clearly seen the worst of people, but he listened patiently as I laid out the whole story. I started with the divorce, Mark's cruelty, the courtroom drama, and the discovery of the safe. I handed him the partnership agreement, the journals, the flash drives, the complete and undeniable proof of Mark's extensive fraud and embezzlement. Harding examined the documents with a practiced eye, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "This is comprehensive," he said, an understatement of epic proportions. "With this, the DA will have him dead to rights. Grand larceny, multiple counts of fraud. He's looking at significant jail time." I took a deep breath. "There's one more thing," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I pushed the wax-sealed envelope across the table. "My godfather left this. He said it was for you." Harding's tired eyes sharpened. He picked up the envelope, examining the seal. He used a small penknife to slit it open carefully, preserving the wax stamp. He pulled out a single folded page and a small plastic baggie containing a key. He read the letter, his face remaining impassive, but a muscle in his jaw began to twitch. When he finished, he looked up at me, and his professional detachment was gone. In its place was a look of profound seriousness. "Mrs. Turner," he said slowly, Alistair Croft was a very smart, very careful man. He slid the letter across the table for me to read. It was short and chillingly direct. To whom it may concern. If you are reading this, I am dead, under circumstances I would deem suspicious. Mark Turner has been systematically stealing from our company. I confronted him on March 11th, and his reaction was not one of surprise, but of cold, calculating anger. I fear he is more dangerous than I previously imagined. I have a heart condition, which provides a perfect cover for anyone wishing me ill. In the enclosed bag is a key to my personal safe deposit box at the downtown First National Bank. In it, you will find a sample of my daily heart medication, which I had tested by a private lab on March 12th. I suspected the pills had been tampered with. The lab's report is with the sample. May God have mercy on his soul. The air left my lungs in a rush. I felt dizzy, sick. Mark hadn't just waited for Alistair's heart to give out. He had helped it along. He had exploited a sick old man's trust, replacing his life-saving medication with something useless, or perhaps something harmful, all to get his hands on $1 million insurance policy and a restaurant he felt entitled to. The memory of Mark looking noble and exhausted as he handled Alistair's funeral arrangements flashed in my mind, and I felt a wave of pure revulsion. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Detective Harding acted swiftly. The contents of Alistair's safe deposit box were exactly as he'd described. The lab report confirmed the pills had been replaced with placebos, harmless sugar pills that did nothing to manage his severe arrhythmia. It was a subtle, almost perfect murder. Armed with this, the DA charged Mark not only with fraud and embezzlement, but with first-degree murder. His slick lawyer, Mr. Peterson, dropped him as a client the moment the murder charge was announced. Mark's carefully constructed world had not just crumbled, it had been annihilated. The trial was a media sensation. The story of the grieving goddaughter, the hidden safe, and the posthumous letter was headline news. I had to testify, to recount every lie, every betrayal, every loving memory of Alistair that Mark had twisted and corrupted. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But with every word, I felt Alistair's presence, his quiet strength guiding me. Mark was found guilty on all counts. The judge, the very same one from our divorce hearing, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no remorse. He just stared at me from the defendant's table, his face a hollow mask of the man I once thought I loved. There was no charm left, only the empty void of his own greed. With Mark in prison and his assets frozen, the divorce was a formality. The courts invalidated all the fraudulent documents he had tricked me into signing. The gilded spoon, my dream that had become a nightmare, was returned to me, its rightful owner. For a while, I couldn't bear to set foot in it. The walls held too many ghosts. But then I remembered Alistair's faith in me and my own passion that had been buried for so long. I closed the restaurant for a month. With Eleanor's blessing, Alistair had left his share to her, and she promptly signed it all over to me, saying it was what he would have wanted. I began to reclaim it. I didn't change the name, but I changed everything else. I brought in a new staff, created a new menu, and scrubbed the place clean of Mark's memory. The day we reopened, I placed a single beautiful vase in the center of the main dining room, right against the brick wall that had held our salvation. It was a quiet tribute to the man who had saved me twice. It's been a year now. The Gilded Spoon is more successful than ever. It's not just a business, it's a testament to resilience, to truth, and to the enduring power of a good man's love. Sometimes, when the dining room is full, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses, I look at that wall, and I can almost feel Alistair smiling, finally at peace. Mark wanted me to have not a penny, but in the end, I got something so much more valuable. I got justice. I got my life back, and I got to keep our dream.